Are low interest rates impacting on your investment returns? It's time to rethink. Rethink Investing creates wealth for clients through the strategic purchase of positively geared, high cash flow commercial property. Industrial properties, retail assets, or office spaces can be a smart investment option that produces significant and long-term return on investment. Rethink your investment options and look to commercial property. Learn more at rethinkinvesting.com.au. Rethink Investing, Australia's #1 commercial buyers agency.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show with your host, Phil Tarrant.
G'day everyone, how are you going? Thanks for joining us on the podcast today as we navigate what is COVID-19 and lockdown. And while the rest of Australia, myself included, thinking that we were in a positive setting a month or so ago and everything moving back to relaxation of some of the restrictions and getting businesses back in action, getting people back to work, we found ourselves in a bit of a tough situation right now, particularly our friends and our colleagues down in Victoria, who is getting absolutely smashed at the moment. And just on the day that we're recording this particular podcast, the biggest numbers ever have come out in terms of new coronavirus cases. So we have a bit of a situation at the moment. It's a lot more than just a bit of a situation. And the whole of Australia is highly invested in helping the nation proceed and bring itself out of COVID-19. But this is going to be with us for quite some time. And I think it's going to be one of those cyclical things as we return to some level of normal, as we all explore and navigate the New South Wales. Sydney has been locked down out of Queensland now. So Sydney side is not allowed up north anymore, which has thrown a whole bunch of holiday plans to disarray. The border is shut between Victoria and New South Wales. No one knows what's happening right now. What we do know is that we've all got to work together to make sure that we can combat the impacts of coronavirus, and we will have our role to play. But for property investors, there's a lot of unknowns, and I speak to investors all day, every day, and there was this sentiment that from some of the sort of key negativities that we heard late March, some of the attitudes of banks around property price declines, there was a lot of scaremongering happening. We've been talking about it. We've been getting analysis, interpretation of it. It hasn't been as bad as what everyone thought, but who knows what's going to happen in Victoria over this period of time. A little bit outside my pay grade. So what I've done is bring the right person into the studio to have a chat about us, who knows absolutely everything about what's going down in Victoria right now, because not only are they living it, they're also the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, Leah Calnan. Leah, how are you going? You well?
I'm good, thanks, Phil.
How's it going down there?
At least I know New South Wales now will understand what Victoria feels like, the lepers of the country.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think it's just really Melbourne and is it the Mitchell Shire who are the true lepers? I think the rest of the rest of regional Victoria is doing a little bit better. And I remember we had a big sort of Australian Broking Awards 2 Tuesdays ago, I think it was. And we had some people in lockdown in Melbourne, and they were by themselves, or 2 people in a family. But then just down the road in Geelong, they still having big parties where they were actually allowed to congregate. So it's a tale of 2 cities, no doubt, at the moment. But
absolutely.
How are Victorians doing? You're pretty sort of resilient down there and stoic. I imagine you'll sort it out, but a bit of pain at the moment.
Yeah, look, we are. We're definitely resilient. I think everyone is frustrated, the most commonly used word at the moment, frustrated and disappointed that our numbers continue to increase. And again, disappointing today, we're in excess of 700 cases, which is just out of control. But from a positive point of view, I have to say that the industry as a whole has just been so agile, and they've just got in and done what they needed to do. They've worked with change, they've worked with legislation change, working with challenging situations. We called it about, I think, 2 weeks prior to the Premier to say now's the time to start wearing masks, guys. And they all did. So we just need to get in it and get through it.
How long have you been president of the REIV now, Leah?
God, it feels like many years. No, it's 9 months.
9 months. And they reckon because of COVID-19, Prime Minister will be remembered as one of the greatest Australian Prime Ministers in our history. So no doubt those other people in office will either be scored very well for how they dealt with COVID-19 or poorly. And I don't want to get into what Victoria thinks about your Premier at the moment, the man of the moment, whether or not he could have done things differently. Are you finding yourself navigating COVID-19? Are you doing a pretty good job?
Yeah, I think we are actually doing a really good job. We know that, we hit March and we needed to quickly work out what was going to happen. And I've said for a little while now, the industry in Victoria has often been a little bit slow, and slow in the sense that slow to take on technology, slow to adjust to change. But I have to say that as soon as new changes were announced and we had new legislation, or we went into the first stage of lockdown, the industry said, okay, tell me what we need to do. And they just did it. We saw the auction campaigns change to that blended approach, being, onto a online platform. We saw open for inspections change into private inspections. We saw, they just continue to change, and they're doing it amazingly well, and property prices are doing really well as well.
Yeah, we'll have a chat about property prices in a moment. And, I think the leadership that I've seen, irrespective of the state, irrespective of whether it's business or in public office, openness, transparency, good communication, understanding of potential outcomes, planning for the worst, hoping for the best. These are the type of things, taking action quickly and decisively is what's been key during COVID-19. And for property investors, it's been a bit of a ride for many people. Here we were last year running up into the federal election, everyone thinking that the government was going to change. There's going to be huge wholesale shifts in terms of policies around negative gearing or CGT, that under a Labor government, the backside was going to fall out of the property markets. What we found out was that Australia voted a particular way, and the government, Morrison government, stays in. People started to get excited about property. There was huge buying activity, and this was after a period of time with downward sentiment because of increased APRA requirements, trying to slow down the market. So things kick back into gear, and then bang, COVID-19 hits and throws the industry and throws property investors on its head. Now, one of the big headlines out of COVID-19 was the speed at which government put rules in place around supporting tenants who were in distress. And this sort of came out at a similar time to JobKeeper and JobSeeker. What we saw in the biggest fear for property investors was every single tenant calling up saying, hey, I can't afford to pay my rent and you can't throw me out. We sort of got beyond that. And I think the actual impacts of it was very small, sort of 1% to 2% of people actually had to apply some sort of discounting or rent-free period. Is that returning in Victoria now that we've entered this sort of phase 2.0, whatever you want to call it, of COVID-19?
Yeah, absolutely. We are seeing that on the ground, that the requests for rent reductions have started to resume. If we go back to March, and property managers were very much working in the grey. And once it was very clear that a person was deemed to be in rental stress, paying more than 30% of their reduced income, it gave property managers and landlords a really clear indication of, okay, my tenant's now paying 40%, we can introduce a 10% rent reduction, and, we'll do that agreement for 2 to 3 months and then review things at the end of that. And we all did anticipate that we would be in a different place, to those 2 to 3 months down the track. But, we're not. So now we're seeing on the ground that there are those same requests coming through. People whose employment were in the hospitality field, retail and travel. Those are the same requests that we're still seeing come through, and making sure that whenever they're paying more than that 30%, that we can, negotiate some type of rent reduction for them for a period of time.
I don't know if you've got absolute numbers on this, but no doubt anecdotal numbers. How many people who during that first wave and now moving into the second wave were requesting rent reductions with genuine hardship versus people who were just being a bit opportunistic, is what I'll call it?
Yeah, look, absolutely, that was happening. I use my business as an example. We were seeing not as high numbers as we were anticipating, and we've got about 2,100 properties under management across Metro Melbourne. At one stage, I think we got to as high as about 70 requests for rent reductions, which again is very, very reasonable. But that's also because of our geographic spread. If you look at Melbourne, and if you had a rent roll or an investment property all in the South Yarra area where it's a high level of hospitality, then those businesses and those landlords and tenants had greater request reductions coming through. Absolutely, there were some making requests without any justification. I think my favourite that I heard early on was, my neighbour just lost her job and got a rent reduction. I'm still fully employed, but can I have a 20% rent reduction too? So, I think that's just part of our human nature. If there's an opportunity for somebody to get a better deal, they needed to raise that. What we are now seeing in the CBD market, though, is that property managers and investors need to be smart. with their renegotiation of their tenants. So they're far better off to take a 20, 30% rent reduction for a time and keep that tenancy in occupation rather than go to vacancy, because vacancy is increasing in and around the CBD and within a few kilometres of CBD.
Yeah, I was reasonably colourful in my language back when the discussion was around people sort of being opportunistic with rent reductions, particularly when you saw a body of change.org type people sort of rebelling against all landlords, saying that don't pay your rent. It was quite a militant view of it all, which I thought was not very, well, I'd call the term un-Australian, and thankfully common sense has prevailed. I use a property manager for all of my property investors. They're a great resource for me and I speak a lot about it. But in this particular circumstance, there's been a great buttress between the tenant and myself as a landlord to help be a middle ground to actually do the negotiation rather than going direct. What's been your recommendations to property managers about how you deal with this and how you actually address these particular requests? And for those property investors who don't have a property manager, how can they navigate this stuff?
Look, it's definitely been a challenge. I think once we moved out of that grey component of, it was really, spinning a wheel to determine what sort of rent reduction to give somebody who'd just been laid off or was not employed at that particular time. So once we started with that formula of the 30%, we'd actually designed, the REIV designed a rent relief calculator that we're able to push out to the state. And it was very easy for a property manager to put in, okay, what were they earning prior to COVID-19? What was their contribution towards their rent financially? And then after with COVID-19. And that's the same formula needs to apply for self-managed owners and investors. They need to be doing the same thing. You need to be looking at pay slips and looking at what were they achieving an income prior to COVID-19 and then during COVID-19. Government did introduce and has introduced some, 25% reduction on their land tax, but there's a large portion of investors that, I think the stat is 76% of investors own one property and most of them don't qualify, thankfully, for paying land tax. And then there was also the addition of the $2,000 grant, and there was some criteria around that tenants needed to meet. But government, in a lot of circumstances, have been very, very slow to facilitate those payments coming through. So we're just seeing them now. May requests are coming through, and we're August on Saturday.
So there is a little bit of genuine hardships out there, and I think to be able to negotiate with tenants is absolutely critical and help them out during a period of time. But what I'm hearing from you, Leah, is that you're best to deal with the facts rather than with the emotions connected with this. And something like that calculator is something very tangible. You just plug it in the numbers and the metrics and it just tell you what the outcome is, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that as soon as we were able to introduce that, it made it very clear. It took that emotional aspect away because it's been very heavy for a lot of property managers. They have probably been beaten emotionally. A lot of businesses sent their teams home. So, at one stage we were hearing reports that, some agencies were in the 200 numbers of rent requests coming through. So if you're just dealing with that every day, it'd be a bit like doing maintenance 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's heavy, it's repetitive, and people want action straight away.
Yeah, and in many ways, property managers been sort of the doctors and the nurses for property investors during COVID-19 in terms of being that mechanism to help navigate it. And I've been hearing some great stories and, I'm pretty reasonable to the property managers that support my portfolio, but at times I'm sure I can probably be a bit of annoying to them. And it's a tough job, right? It is a tough job. And anyone that uses a property manager, you've got to really understand and appreciate just the work that they do. And it is relentless. You never have a day off, really, do you?
No, I described a lot that life as a property manager, and even in that resi or commercial space, was a bit like living in a snow globe. I come up to the start of March, they were still working with one piece of legislation that, if we talk about the resi space, where it's been working for the last 20 years, all of a sudden new legislation came in, they've all been tipped upside down, and now they're having to quickly learn new legislation on the hop. And then come the 26th of September, that legislation is due to be repealed, so that will expire, and we go back to what was the 1997 legislation in Victoria. And then come on or prior to the 1st of January, they've shaken again and they have to learn new legislation. So they've, they've done it tough.
Yeah, they've done it tough. And just to finish this bit on rent reductions, is it easier the second time around because you know what's expected and how to deal with these requests? Or are you finding more requests this time around versus what it was when COVID first hit in March?
Look, it definitely is easier because you know the formula and you know the language to use for both owner and tenant. There is definitely a slight increase in the number of those requests coming through because businesses are now making more commercial decisions. I think if we go back a few months ago, they were still making quite a emotive decision on, okay, we've got JobKeeper to be okay. But come the end of September, when JobKeeper comes out of its current format and goes into that new format, I think we'll then see a potential flow on again. I wouldn't be surprised that we'll see round 3 of rent reduction requests.
Okay. How would you sort of crystallise the attitude that property investors should have towards tenants seeking some sort of relief? Should they be hard nosed? Should they be, really accommodating? Horses for courses, no doubt, but you probably don't want to be too belligerent in this. Like, how do you balance the losing a good tenant versus retaining them and things getting good in the future? Or if they've been a bad tenant up until now, you can't actually evict anyone, can you?
No. So that's the other challenge that we're dealing with. I think you've got to look at, first of all, what industry is the tenant working in. If you have a look at that, that will give you some insight because, say they're in real estate, yes, there have been some reduction in some hours and some pays, but overall real estate has sustained continuity across the last few months. You've got to look at whether or not that particular property, if it comes up for release, do you need to paint and carpet? Do you have expenses that you're going to potentially need to, have the money to be able to do those works? And have the conversation with the property manager. If my tenant was to vacate, am I going to be able to release it quickly? Because if you are 10 kilometres, 15 kilometres out of Metro Melbourne, your property will release and you'll probably find that you'll only have a short vacancy period. You're not going to have a 4 or 5 month vacancy period. But if you are in the CBD, then you are potentially going to have a long vacancy period. So you have to be smart and savvy, and you need to make quick decisions with regards to what asking rent you need to put in place for a short period of time.
So there's obviously a mechanism for dealing with disputes in Victoria, VCAT. I want to have a chat about that, but we'll just go to break beforehand. Back in a moment.
Whether you're an avid property investor or about to buy your first property, why do it alone when you could partner with Australia's best buyer's agent? Director of Pure Property Investment, Property Investment Professionals of Australia board member and REV Buyer's Agent of the Year, Paul Glossop, can take your portfolio to the next level. Get in touch today to discuss your investment goals. Get one-on-one insight from Paul Glossop. And for the first 100 people, this service is completely free. Head to purepropertyinvestment.com today to schedule your consult with Paul Glossop directly.
Welcome back, everyone. Phil Tarrant, host of the Smart Property Investment Show with Leah Calnan. She's the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. They're locked up at the moment. And just going back to the frustration that you mentioned beforehand, Leah, and how some people have reacted and responded to this COVID-19 lockdown. I think the new lexicon or meme around it now is Karen something or other, right? Bunnings Karen or whatever, like where people are just, I'd put it out there, who are just idiots, right? That we sometimes give them way too much airplay, but some people are taking a particular approach to all this sort of stuff, right? Which is holding everyone back. How angry are Victorians around what's been deemed to be some pretty mismanagement just in terms of quarantining environments? Because this is pretty much where it all comes from, right?
Yeah, it's certainly looking that it's come from the quarantine hotels. Look, yeah, absolutely, Victorians are angry. They're frustrated because they want to just get on and do what they love and do what they need to do. But in the same breath, they are happy to home and happy to just to get through it. But yeah, I know I put on my Facebook page the other night, thank goodness I'm a Leah and not a Karen, because there's certainly been some interesting Karens out there.
I saw Domino's Pizzas giving free pizzas to Karens just to try and just to demystify the negative name at the moment. So I think if you are a Karen, you can get a free pizza.
Yeah, good to know.
which is pretty good. No, I wouldn't mind a Domino's pizza, but so things don't always go to plan. Now, I think a good property manager, and even if you self-manage with some smart negotiation and some reasonable negotiation, you should be able to find a way to navigate your way through this. And one of the benefits of having a property manager is that you've got their sort of good officers to try and help mediate a conclusion. You must deal with, in your role there as president, a whole bunch of property managers. Are they collectively sort of seeing the world the same way? Because from experience, when I look at, I've got, quite a large portfolio, some property managers are definitely on the side of Phil Tarrant, and they absolutely represent me. Whereas other property managers, I sometimes think, just verge more into the side of or supporting the tenant. So I don't think I'm getting the right advice and recommendation around that. How do you know if your property manager's like acting in your best interests or trying to make something go away just by an easy outcome?
I think the best question you could ask them is, if this was your property, what would you do? And if they'll quickly give you the answer. And if they and ah, I think that could suggest that perhaps the sentence that's about to follow might not be a true reflection of what they might do. But often I say to clients, look, if this was my property, this is the pathway I would take. I know I've got a client at the moment and the tenant is $6,000 in arrears. And we can't evict them and we're still waiting on VCAT, and the owner is extremely frustrated. And all I can say to him every time he calls, and he blows off some steam and he's, clearly he's frustrated. And I say, I agree. Absolutely, I agree. And if there was anything I could do to fix it, I would. But unfortunately, this is just a space that we're in. You have to then say, positive note, you'll get it as a tax deduction. We will get through it. It's not going to happen, not going to last forever, but you just have to realise it's not the property manager's fault, but you just have to work through it.
I guess sometimes it comes to the point of putting someone into your property as well. Like $6,000 is a lot of money. That's a fair bit of arrears, right? And you get, in inverted commas, professional tenants who know the system really well. Most tenants are pretty reasonable, but that's someone who's deliberately knows that they shouldn't still be living in that place, right?
No, absolutely. They know. They know. They've seen it on the news. Yeah, working the system. And unfortunately, then you've got a varying process at VCAT at the moment where, depending on the member that you strike on the day, because remember, everything's via phone, it's not face-to-face in that court system at the moment, you may get an order of possession, but it might have an extra clause that says that you can't purchase a warrant until after the 27th of September. You may get an order of possession that says you can execute the warrant because this is not related to COVID-19, or the one I saw yesterday where the application was completely dismissed and this tenant owes just shy of $10,000 because the owner couldn't prove that the tenant was financially affected by COVID. So there's these continually varying scenarios, which makes it very hard to navigate. And it's hard to keep everyone wanting to go back and do it again because you just want to get resolution and we're just not getting that.
You do, and it can get quite fatiguing. And we're talking about VCAT here, which is the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, where issues between tenants and landlords are tested and hopefully resolved, and it's binding, isn't it, VCAT, if whatever their ruling is needs to happen. Yeah. So can you give me some sense, Leah, on there's this idea that you cannot evict someone from a property because of COVID-19. That's not actually the case. They need to actually be deliberately actually impacted by COVID-19 and proved. And I think it changes on a state basis, but say this person here, if they owe $6,000, that $6,000 just doesn't go away. They still owe you the money at a point in time, correct?
Yeah, they do. So the challenge is that you might get an order from VCAT at the moment, but then there is the selection of police stations that are refusing to execute warrants because of the concern of health and safety. So you feel like you have battled, you've had one tick, yes, I've got the order, and now that's the start, and now I can work out the end process for this particular tenant. And then you get stonewalled by the police to say, well, actually, no, we're not going to do it. So then you're stuck. And then, you add the level of insurance. So what happened over the last few months is if anyone has renewed their landlord insurance during the last 4 months, what a lot of investors just won't notice is that the insurance bodies have pulled out or dramatically reduced the loss of rent components in those policies. So they might have had a 15-week loss of rent component come the 1st of March. They've renewed the 1st of May, and that a loss of rent component might have been removed completely, or it might have been reduced to a 6-week loss of rent.
It's a bit cheeky as well. Check your insurance policies. But how do you go about, just say you're owed the money and the tenant finally departs, and how do you get paid? Like, as a landlord, property managers can help you pursue this, but if you're doing it yourself, it's sometimes hard to do. If you got a rule in your favour and they owe $6,000, like the sheriff can come in and take their stuff pretty much? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so you've got to get a certified order through VCAT. So you've got to apply and get that stamped, and then it's a matter of registering it with the court system and then potentially organising a debt collector to go in and source it and try and retrieve the funds. You certainly won't get all of those funds back. And I know I joke to say that it's, it is a tax deduction, but you have to find some level of lightheartedness in this, because if you don't, you just get very heavy and the whole process becomes very heavy. But you will get something back, but it might take years. That's the other part. And in the meantime, depending if it's a self-managed property and that person hasn't been registered on any of the databases, then the likes of me as a property manager, they apply, I do all my checks, don't find anything wrong with them. But then all of a sudden that great tenant, in inverted commas, is then transferred to somebody else who will most probably have to deal with the same behaviour.
Yeah, and you really need to be aware of this as a property investor. And we try and dispel this a fair bit on the Smart Property Investment Show, Leah, is that I think a lot of tenants think property investors are rich and it's okay for them because they're wealthy and they won't notice it anyway. I think 8% of all Australians claim some sort of deduction on their tax return as a result of investing in property. Most property investors, and most being a big with a capital M, have between 1 and 2 properties. So these are just Australian mum and dads just trying to get by, trying to save up and plan for a nice, more comfortable retirement, and are using property investment as the asset class to support that. $6,000 can hurt. And I know any investor, even if they've got a big portfolio, $6,000 is a lot of money.
It's enormous. And we've seen on the ground, normally through July when it's, end of financial year, normally we would see, owners saying, yep, I'm going to go and see my accountant. We've definitely seen an increase in the number of clients saying, oh, I'm just missing that statement, or do you have that rates notice? I can't find it. Or I can't find last year's end of financial report. So there's definitely been an increase in the number of investors who have pushed through and got their tax returns lodged quickly.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to do at this point in time. If you need some cash flow, it can work really well. So you mentioned new legislation which property managers need to get across. And does that legislation apply also to if you're self-managing? There's still the similar rules and regulations around how you go about doing it, right? So if you don't know about this and you self-manage, you could find yourself in a spot of bother.
Oh, absolutely. Because effectively what they did is they removed all notice to vacate. So to end a tenancy through the Omnibus Bill, you have to, first of all, apply to get a Consumer Affairs reference number. And then that allows you to make an application to VCAT. And effectively what you then are doing is you are making that application to VCAT for the VCAT member to give you permission to end a tenancy. And at the moment, we're seeing about an 8-week delay with VCAT hearing. So for example, if you're selling the property and you've just lodged your application today with VCAT, that takes 8 weeks before you'll get a hearing. And then at that hearing, if the VCAT member decides that yes, your position is that you should be entitled to end that tenancy, the 60 days, which would normally have been served some 8 weeks prior, takes effect from that date. So that's where you've got to look at your timeframes for settlement, because that will add considerable delays in that space.
So VCAT is getting smashed at the moment. Is the system clogged up? Like it's just time consuming, fatiguing. It's uncertain. Are they doing anything to try and speed through? How many sort of cases are in the system right now? Do you know?
At the moment, there's a backlog of about 3,500 cases.
Okay.
We have raised it. So when I say we, being REIV, we've raised it with the Andrews government and also the opposition to say this is just not acceptable. You've got investors who are bleeding out there who need to get some resolution.
Yeah, and I guess the point here would be if you can avoid getting into the system by just some good, sound, sensible negotiation, I reckon that would be the favourable outcome, Leah.
Yeah.
If you can.
If you can.
Leah, I want to have a chat about property price dynamics down in Victoria. We'll just go to break beforehand. Back in a moment.
Are low interest rates impacting on your investment returns? It's time to rethink. Rethink Investing creates wealth for clients through the strategic purchase of positively geared, high cash flow commercial property. Industrial properties, retail assets, or office spaces can be a smart investment option that produces significant and long-term return on investment. Rethink your investment options and look to commercial property. Learn more at rethinkinvesting.com.au. Rethink Investing, Australia's #1 commercial buyers agency.
Welcome back, everyone. Phil Tarrant, host of the Smart Property Investment Show, with the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, the REIV is acronym you're probably more familiar with, Leah Calnan. Now, I remember back towards the end of COVID, and I think the 28th of March was the worst day then, when I think Australia worked out that we've got a long, hard road ahead of us when infections spiked. And I think back to have superseded that now. I haven't seen the most latest numbers, but a lot of the banks, a lot of commentators were quick to come out of the blocks talking about what would happen to property prices. And even the last couple of days or so, we've seen CPI drop, I think it was maybe 1.9. I can't remember exactly the number. The biggest drop since they started keeping numbers. And I think it was the first negative we've had since the late 80s or so. So the economy is in a state of flux. Back then, depending on who you listened to in March, there was upwards of 30% drop in prices, worst case scenario from one of the major banks. Some of the other lenders less so, a little bit more conservative, but there was this wholesale assumption that prices are going to go backwards. When you look at the dynamics of vacancy rates right now, all these things work in unison, probably outside the scope of an economic lesson through the Smart Property Investment Show. However, what's going on down in Melbourne sort of prices, and I guess we can put a foot in both camps and talk about metropolitan Melbourne, and then we can talk about maybe some of the regional centres like Ballarats and your Bendigos, et cetera, even Geelong. Are prices holding firm? Is there much stock out there at the moment?
Well, absolutely, prices are holding firm. We saw the June quarter results come in, and we saw a slight adjustment of 3.5% back from the March quarter results. And at the most, I was anticipating 5%. So to see a 3.5, it was certainly positive. The biggest challenge that, if you ask any agent in Melbourne at the moment, is that they just don't have the stock levels. There's good level of buyer activity out there, but just low stock levels. And, we have to also remember we're in the middle of winter, and that's not unusual. If we look at year on, year out, if we go back to 2019 and 18, the winter months is always that quarter where there is low stock and low transactions. So, if there was going to be a time to have COVID, which, this was the time for the Victorian property market because there was those, low transactions or low stock levels.
So this sort of lack of liquidity is helping hold prices firms. I imagine that's got to be looked at within the context also of the lowest interest rates we've had in generations. So there is buyers out there and not so many properties for sale. Do you think everyone talks about this September cliff, which they're now sort of pushing forward to it being maybe a mini cliff and then there being another cliff in March when the JobKeeper, JobSeeker 2.0 phases out? Can you see a lot of distressed sellers out there at that point in time looking to shift their property? I imagine you've been able to hold it so far, your investment properties up until now, with some good management, some good negotiation, which we spoke about, and keeping tenants in there, hopefully can hold firm?
Yeah, I think I can't see we are going to have that cliff. There's been no evidence so far. And I know, I woke up and saw, I think it was on the front page in Melbourne, and it was 34% property price crash. And I questioned myself and I thought, where are they getting all of these figures and that particular figure from? Because on the ground every day, I was just hearing from agents, properties are selling. We've had so many more people on the ground looking at showing properties. Vendors are wanting to sell. So there was all of this activity, and it just didn't what the media was portraying. So that's certainly frustrating on all levels, and we see that and we learn to deal with that. But I think there will be a number of properties that will hit the market and that spring market. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see, people say, you know what, I'm not going to go middle of spring. I'm actually going to put my property on the market that second last week of August and start to get the activity happening there, because there's definitely activity out there.
Have you found that because of the lockdown, and you still got some way to go through it, whether it gets extended or not, who knows? I've got property down in Victoria or Melbourne. I've never ever seen it. I'm an out-of-state investor. Do you think that's going to impact markets? The fact that, non-domiciled Victorians aren't potentially investing in property and you've got less competition. How do you see that playing out? And I guess where I'm going with that is that what are you seeing the best investors doing at the moment to operate effectively and buy well or sell well in the Victorian market?
I think what COVID has actually brought to the table is that perhaps our life was a little crazy. And I think there's opportunity for a more blended approach. And blended in the sense that you could look at working from home 2 days a week and then working in the office 3 days a week or vice versa. And I think regional Victoria has a lot of opportunities, and we've seen that spike over the last 6 to 8 weeks, where all of a sudden there was a lot of activity coming from Metro Melbourne going into the likes of Ballarat and Bendigo. I spoke to a Wodonga agent and they had 50 blocks of land to sell, and in the month of June they did 48. So, wow. We're in the middle of COVID and these transactions are still happening. And that's a combination of, money's cheap. We've got a lot of activity out there. Perhaps lifestyle is more important at the moment than, working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. But also, we've added the extension of the first home buyers grant. They added the $25,000 grant for renovations and building. So there's a lot of extra little stimulus packages available for people, but there's still that activity happening. And it's no different from a sale to a rental. Properties are still leasing, properties are still selling. People will still need to move in and out of property.
And for our property investors that aren't too familiar with what the REIV does or any of the real estate institutes and real estate, the nationwide one as well, are you a lobbying body? Are you an advocacy body? Do you only represent people that work within real estate? How do property investors think? And are you actually trying to shape policy for investors and real estate agents?
So we're a membership organisation across the state of Victoria, and as is all the other REIs. It's a combination of, we do an enormous amount of advocacy, and probably leading up to COVID-19, people just didn't realise how much we actually did. And, one of the things that we've really brought to the forefront of real estate and also the public is that there is a lot of activity going on a regular basis. I've got a CEO that has the mobile numbers of, premiers and chiefs of staff, and there's that constant communication. And, I'll use the example today where we had, over 700 cases announced in Victoria. And my phone, whenever there's an announcement, my phone beeps, and all of a sudden is what's going to happen with Geelong, because Geelong was actually excluded from Metro Melbourne. And Gil's message back to me is, yep, onto it, already got a message in, just waiting on a response. So there's a lot of advocacy there. There's a lot of training and development in the space and a lot of legislation. So the REIV is that body that represents effectively landlords, property managers and agents to try and get the best outcome possible for all.
Do you have a position that you publicly share on how the Andrews government is progressing through COVID-19 with view towards the property markets? Is there anything more you'd like to see that you're not seeing?
Look, we certainly don't take sides with any part of government. We've had a very open and transparent relationship with the Andrews government and with the Premier's office. Sometimes we need to highlight what our level of contribution is to the state. I think in total, the property industry contributes, just under 50% of the state's income that comes in. So, we're an important player. So
hence the reason why your CEO has got the Premier's mobile number, no doubt. That's a big stick.
Yeah, it's a huge contribution that we're making on a regular basis. And that's, land tax, stamp duty, or any of the other 19 taxes I think the Andrews government introduced to the property market in the last 5 or 6 years.
It's one thing that all property investors know about. It's taxes and stuff. And Leah, I'll close with this question. Did you invest in property? Are you a property investor?
Yes, I have invested in property. Yep.
So what's your recommendation for property investors investing or thinking about Melbourne/Victoria at the moment? Number one, as maybe a place to invest in. And number two, how to be a good investor in Victoria. What would be those 2 or 3 things you think you can get right and make it a good experience rather than a less than memorable experience?
Look, I think the first thing is you're not going to get a bargain. And I think that needs to be completely, everyone needs to be reminded you're not going to get a bargain out in the Victorian property market at the moment. And we're consistent and it's strong and it's very resilient. If I was looking to invest at this stage, I would look at what opportunities are out in regional Victoria. And I think you'd look at the affordability elements because there are so many great buying opportunities in regional Victoria. I think COVID will teach us that perhaps we want to grow our own vegetables or perhaps we want to have more lawn now. And that's changed the tune a little bit from the last 10 years. And is there an opportunity for a home office? What is that going to look like? Being a property manager through and through, it would be remiss of me not to say, engage a property manager, talk to them. Their knowledge is invaluable. They have so much understanding of what's going on the ground. And I think that is what has made me a really active and, a president that can say, this is what's happening because I'm hearing it. I'm in my office. I'm seeing it every single day. So I think look at those opportunities regionally, but also talk to a property manager. They are very knowledgeable and are often underutilised.
I think it might be Victorian. I'll close with this. I think we reported on the Property Managers Day. Is that right?
Yeah, National Property Managers Day.
How did it all go? Was it like, you give your property manager a cake and a case of beer sort of thing? Like, what was the purpose of that particular initiative? Because I'm very pro property manager, by the way.
Yeah, look, it was nationwide, so it was across all the states of the country and was endorsed by the Real Estate Institute of Australia. It was really just an acknowledgement for both resi and commercial property managers to say, hey guys, just keep going. You've done a remarkable job, and we know it's tough. You know, they're a little bit like, you know, what I would describe, you know, I've said to a few people, I feel like I'm a bit like a duck. I'm very calm on the top and my legs are just, you know, pedaling madly underneath the water. And I think property managers are a bit like that at the moment.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I know what my property managers do for me and how they manage my assets, and property manager asset managers. So make sure you say thank you to your property managers. I think it would go a long way, because often they just get the raw end of the stick and all the negative stuff. It's okay to show your appreciation every now and then. So it's like Mother's Day. You don't have to wait once a year to say thank you. You can do it more often. I imagine that's probably my bad message.
That's right. You know, as a mum, I agree. But also, don't write to us in capitals. It's not nice writing to property managers.
Does it help? Does it? Does that mean it's more important? Is it?
No. Start with how are you, maybe. Yeah.
So just I'm going to go this. I'm going to ask questions. So that's one way to get the best out of your property manager. How do you really make sure that when they see that your number on their mobile phone, rather than just letting it go to the keeper and just thinking, I'll deal with that as a voicemail, versus picking it up and with a smile on your face? How do you be a better investor for your property manager?
Listen to the advice that they give. You know, often, you know, I've got certainly some grumpy clients that, you know, I have to, you know, take a breath when I answer the phone. But I think if you can start sometimes the conversations with, you know, Phil, you know what, you're not actually going to like what I've got to say, but I'm going to tell you how it is. You'll earn a whole level of respect. And it also makes them realise that it's not your fault. It's not the property manager's fault if the tenant hasn't paid the rent, or if they're vacating or the carpet needs to be replaced. It's about just having some really good lines of communication. And, you know, I say to my team, you know, that thing on the desk, you've got to pick it up. You've got to call people. There are some people that like to chat on the phone. There are some people that like to email. But often when somebody is an email warrior, picking up the phone can build a whole new relationship with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I try and be pretty upfront with our property managers of how I like to communicate and how to get the best out of me. And trying to call me up is often hard work because I'm never normally around or I'm doing something else. So, you know, just have property managers are just normal people, right? Like this.
Yeah, we are.
You're not a different breed.
No, but you know, if you know that about somebody like you, Phil, and I'm very much a 100 words or less person. You know, if I know that you're super busy, then what I would do is, hey, Phil, your tap's broken in the kitchen. I've arranged the plumber. I expect it won't be any more than $200. If you've got any queries, call me. You know, the message has been delivered. You don't want to be deciding about, am I going to change the tap or not? I've problem solved it for you and your tenant's happy. They're the sort of things.
Look, as a property investor, I like to be led. I like confidence in the communication and just say, I'm going to do this. This is the reason why. If you've got any problems, tell me about it. No worries. Over time, you work it out and you can start making those decisions. But put the parameters in place. Leah Calnan, President, Real Estate Institute of Victoria. Thanks so much for your time today. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me.
Nice one. Remember to check out smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Social media. If that's how you like to get your info in property right across Australia, including Victoria, and what's going on at VCAT. Smart Property HQ for headquarters is where you need to go on social media. If that's how you get your info, please keep those reviews coming wherever you listen to this, on iTunes or any of the Android platforms. The team here get a real kick out of it, knowing that what we're doing is actually making a difference. We'll be back again next time. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Whether you're an avid property investor or about to buy your first property, why do it alone when you could partner with Australia's best buyer's agent? Director of Pure Property Investment, Property Investment Professionals of Australia board member and REIV Buyer's Agent of the Year, Paul Glossop, can take your portfolio to the next level. Get in touch today to discuss your investment goals. Get one-on-one insight from Paul Glossop. And for the first 100 people, this service is completely free. Head to purepropertyinvestment.com today to schedule your consult with Paul Glossop directly.